Good evening and welcome. Tonight we'll be going over the history and geography of Albania. We'll do our geography first and then history, and then we'll flip through this book and look at some really neat pictures of Albania. So, Albania is located in Southeast Europe in an area known as the Balkans. It's bordered by Montenegro up here. It has this border with Kosovo, which is a little bit contentious. Kosovo is declared independent. Serbia still claims it. Some countries recognize it as independent, some don't. But just for the purposes of this video, Albania borders that area of the world. It also borders North Macedonia right here. And it borders Greece to its south. It has a long Mediterranean coastline with this half against the Adriatic and this half against the Ionian Sea. You can't see it on this map, but oh, there's an eel. Italy is like right here. It's pretty nearby. Just a little hop, skip, and a jump over the Adriatic. So Albania has some interesting regions, starting with the coastline. It being a Mediterranean coast, you can imagine that it has the beaches and seaside towns, things like that. Not very many islands, and most of them aren't even inhabited or anything like that. So at the south here, we'll skip to down here. It's all very mountainous except for this area down here, and apparently the coastline here is known as the Albanian Riviera. This town of Saranda, I think, is a big beach town, like a coastal relaxation town. And also down here in this little like valley plains area, which leads into the terrain of northern Greece, there's an ancient Roman ruin called Butrint, which we won't have time to talk about in history, but just know it's there. I think it's like the largest Roman ruin in Albania, even though there are a lot. They're mainly down in the southern region or up along the coast here. Moving in, we can see all these mountains. Lots and lots of mountains, so let's break them down. Up here you can see the North Albanian Alps. They are pretty high. Kind of separating the regions here, you can see the Drin River coming from the border here, flowing all the way through. So in this area, there's also a lot of mountains here in the central area. They're typically known as the Skanderbeg Mountains. You can find the highest point in Albania around here. It's not on this map, but it is Mount Korab or Golem Korab. You can also find the capital city of Tirana right here. And there's also lots and lots of rivers coming through. And you can see some of the lakes in this region. There's a lot more in between here. Obviously smaller ones than the ones you see here. Up here is Lake Shkoner, or Lake Scutari, as it's more commonly known, I think, throughout the world. And then down here we have Lake Ohrid and Lake Prespa, which are lovely, lovely lakes. Absolutely stunning, gorgeous, beautiful, perfect for vacations and all those wonderful mountainy lake activities. And then down here in the southern areas, we have like all of the southern mountain regions. There's quite a few, but the mountains up here think more like jagged, rocky, snowy, right? Down here it's more grassy, not quite as many trees. It's been controlled by like the Romans and various other civilizations, so a lot of trees here have been knocked down over time, so they are pretty high, but not quite as like forested, you know. And of course there's still lots of rivers and things going all through the area. And you know, that's pretty much it for geography. All you really have to know is that it has all of these mountains and these important lakes and rivers, and of course the coastline. Everything that I've read in my research has commented on how absolutely gorgeous the scenery is in Albania and how stunning the landscape is. So you can imagine going through all these mountains and valleys is just pristine wilderness. Just very, very pretty. We'll see some pictures in the book here. But let's jump into history, because Albania has quite a complicated one, like usual. If you're familiar with my channel, or if you're new, welcome. This is going to be a brief overview of Albania's history. A lot has happened in this little corner of the world. At the Balkans, a lot has happened, but in Albania, a lot has gone on. So I will be skipping over a couple of smaller facets of history that I suppose aren't quite as relevant to the whole picture of Albanian history, I suppose. So Albania, or I should say it's Skiperia. They say it in Albanian. Shkiperi. Anyway, I butchered that, I'm sure. Albania has had people living in it since forever. There's evidence of Neanderthals living here, and lots of evidence of early humans, like tools and all the typical evidence that early humans left behind all throughout the region. But the main culture to grow and evolve in this area in ancient times were the Illyrians. The Illyrians were an interesting bunch. At one point in its history, they decided to expand, and they started to head into Roman territory. And this was pretty much when the Roman Empire was pretty near its height, reaching that peak. In 229 BCE, Rome declared war on the Illyrians. They fought quite a bit of wars. Rome would always win. The Illyrians would just come right back and try to fight again, and then Rome would win. And anyway, the Illyrians put up a huge fight, but Rome would win overall, and they would completely control their area by 167 BCE. And Illyria covered quite a lot. It stretched up into Croatia up there. And this became a really important Roman territory called Illyricum, and it was valuable for farming and all different kinds of things. Lots of Roman emperors born in Illyricum, mainly Emperor Constantine, among others. So once the Roman Empire split into two, what's now Albania became part of the eastern half. It was sort of like the westernmost of the eastern half. The western half of the Roman Empire was being attacked and invaded by barbarians, the Vandals, the Ostrogoths, so on and so forth. So what's now Albania, being on that border, it also got invaded by quite a bit of people. There were the Huns, the Avars, too many to mention, a lot. Eventually the Slavs would move in to, again, not just Albania, but this whole area of Europe, and assimilate with the culture. It's not really known when the Albanian ethnicity would have come about. Sometime between this time and the late 1200s. It's all very murky and mysterious. Same with their language. Their language isn't related to any of the other languages anywhere, honestly. It's a strange one, but a cool one. It sounds neat. So, in the Byzantine Empire, they are an Orthodox Christian religion, right? Not a Catholic one like over here. They're Orthodox. So once that became too much of an issue in the 11th century, the Great Schism occurred when the two churches disagreed and split. And this territory was also pretty split. The northern area was predominantly Catholic. The southern area was predominantly Orthodox. It still sort of kind of is to this day. It's a lot more mixed, but it's still generally that sort of. The northern area tried to form a little principality, kind of like the very first Albanian state before being Albanian was a thing. That lasted from 1190 to 1256, once the Byzantine influence took back over. And another one would pop up also in the north in 1272, and that one was known officially as the Kingdom of Albania. That was like the first real Albania. But That one got stamped out by the Venetians, I believe, in conjecture with the Byzantines. The Venetians came in and started controlling, because the Venetians locked down the Adriatic. They owned all of it. They were really intense on that. Until the Ottoman Empire came to power and started to conquer this region. They took over the capital of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, which they renamed to Istanbul, so they were sweeping through what was left of the Byzantine Empire. So when they reached Albania, they were actually stopped by a man who's now known as Skanderbeg. Skanderbeg is like the hero of Albania. He is the #1 most important Albanian to have ever lived. #2, probably Mother Teresa, but #1, like, easily. He is the national hero by far. He held off the Ottoman invasion for a good 25 years or so, when the Ottomans were steamrolling all the other areas around here. I mean, there were battles and things up in Serbia. There's the famous Battle of Kosovo, but the Ottomans were fighting. This is the only place where they had actual real resistance. But Skanderbeg would eventually die, and the Ottomans would come in. There is no one to stop them now. The area was fully occupied by the Ottomans by 1431, and they had quite a tight grip on this area. They laid heavy taxes on anyone who wasn't a Muslim, so a lot of people converted just for convenience. They wouldn't have to pay extra taxes. Some were forced to convert, and some young boys would be kidnapped and taken to Istanbul to train to be a janissary, which was like an elite fighting squad made up of kidnapped Christian boys. Very interesting, I think. And they really tried to stop any kind of Albanian identity and insert their own so that there wouldn't be any kind of cultural uprising. And it stayed that way for a long time, for hundreds and hundreds of years, until the late 18th century, when that nationalism idea was finally popping up in Albania. It had popped up in so many other parts of Europe, especially ones that were under very strong control of the many empires in Europe. But this is when it started in Albania. They would push the Ottomans would push back. They went back and forth until Albania officially declared its independence on November 28th, 1912. The big revolutionary leader was Ismail Kemali. And the Conference of London would happen the next year. So all of the major European powers got together there in London and were like, so what are we going to do about this Albania thing? Like, this little corner of the world just declared its independence. What should we do about it? So they drew up the borders that we see today. And this was sort of a problem because not all ethnic Albanians lived within these borders. A lot of them lived in the Greece area, a lot of them lived in the Kosovo area, and not to mention a lot of Greeks lived in what's now the Albanian area. So it kind of sparked a lot of ethnic tension. They also appointed a prince to rule Albania, but he was apparently horrible, and he left after a year. He tried. So there were people who were still pro-Ottoman, whose farmsteads had thrived under the Ottoman control, that wanted that kind of Ottoman authority over the country. There were those who were opposed, and then there were the Greeks in the area who tried to create their own state within Albania. That failed, and then World War I happened. That was a whole mess. So over time, the person to come to power above all of this was one of those pro-Ottoman landowners. He would go by the name of King Zog, and he was a character. I mean, his name was King Zog. At the end of the day, he was a pro-fascist dictator who held a tight grip over Albania. I mean, fascist dictatorships at this time in history in Europe were kind of the thing, so he was just kind of going along. He really got along well with fascist Italy just next door, to the point where in 1939, Italy just straight up invaded and took over. And, I mean, they were right there. They were prime picking. So the Nazis would eventually occupy, and it became sort of the big base for any kind of other military operations, like to Greece, what have you, for the Axis powers. A guerrilla movement, quite a few guerrilla movements actually sprung up in Albania. Some of them were communist, some were anti-communist, some kind were just like pro-Albanian, but the biggest, most influential one was the communist one. It was led by a man named Enver Hoxha. So once the Nazis finally had to withdraw and fascist Italy had to withdraw, that group came to power, and Enver Hoxha became head of state by 1944. And if King Zog was a character, Enver Hoxha was, wow, he was a lot. He was super communist. Like, he probably had pictures of Stalin up in his bedroom that he stared at and made kissy faces at. Like, he loved Stalin a lot. So he really, really relied on Stalin and the Soviet Union for help in the early years. And then Stalin died, and Hoxha decided that the new leaders in the Soviet Union weren't communist enough, so he headed over to China and got their support until Mao Zedong died, and they cut off ties with China, and they were isolated. He had closed the borders, no one could go in or out. He had outlawed religion. He tried to declare it as the world's first atheist state. He built thousands of concrete bunkers throughout the country in preparation for invasion, nuclear war, what have you. Pretty much the majority of the population was living agrarian lives, just subsistence farming, and they had no knowledge of what was happening outside the borders. They weren't allowed to listen to the radio. A lot of people apparently assumed that Albania was the most advanced country in Europe, just because they didn't know what was going on the outside. And, you know, very typical of these kind of governments, a lot of people would be spied on, a lot of thought police, a lot of teaching children how to spy on their parents, so that people, kind of like in North Korea, it would be like a family arrest. If one person did something wrong, the whole family would be arrested and put in prison. It was really, really rough. Eventually, Enver Hoxha would die. People would take over and try to keep that strong rule, but it was the 1980s. A lot was happening in the communist countries of Europe and Asia. A lot of movements, a lot of protests, a lot of calls for democracy, and that started to happen in Albania. So eventually, by 1991, the government had allowed the borders to be open, people could go in and out, and that was when they allowed multi-party elections to happen, and surprisingly the communists all got voted out, and it became a democratic government again. And the country, you know, wasn't really in the best kind of shape. They were basically starting with nothing in a very advanced corner of the world economically, so they really struggled to climb up the economic ladder and figure themselves out. And unfortunately, some pyramid schemes came in and took advantage of that. Either they were led by government officials or were influenced by government officials, something like that. But many, many Albanians would invest their life savings into these pyramid schemes. If you don't know what a pyramid scheme is, basically there's someone at the top saying, hey, person B, if you get 2 people under you in the pyramid, you'll get part of their money, and then I'll get part of their money. And then those 2 people recruit 2 more people to put in money, and then the money goes up and up. So that was kind of a bad explanation of a pyramid scheme, but eventually you're going to run out of people, and every single pyramid scheme will collapse. Like, it's impossible for one to actually work because it requires more and more people to join. Eventually you're going to run out of people on planet Earth. So the big schemes collapsed in 1996. People lost everything, and riots sparked up in 1997. A brief civil war happened. They needed the UN peacekeeping forces to come in to get everything back to normal. People went on a rampage. Understandably so, I think. If you were tricked into losing your entire life savings and everything you owned, I would be very, very mad as well. So I don't really blame them, but it was pretty, there were deaths and everything. It was rough. So since then, Albania has been, like I said, just trying to get on its feet, trying to figure out who it is in Europe, on the world stage, economically, politically, so on and so forth. They did join NATO in 2009, and they also applied to join the EU. The EU has been kind of going back and forth. You know, they kind of joined at a rough time. North Macedonia tried joining at this time as well. And, you know, the EU's been trying to figure out its own issues, so it's kind of tabled the accession of Albania and North Macedonia, pushing it back. You know, they want to make sure that the various minorities in the countries are being well treated before they get it admitted to the EU. And literally today, the day I filmed this, I'm like looking at my calendar, literally today, the day I'm filming this, the EU agreed to allow further talks to accept Albania and North Macedonia into the EU. And it's looking like it's actually going to happen this time. So it's probably in maybe 2023, maybe 24, Albania could be joining the EU. We'll see. We shall see. It's all very uncertain. But basically that's where Albania is today. It's a very interesting history and country, and quite a lot. So let's look through the book. I'll tell you a little bit more about history and things that I skipped over when we see the pictures, but see, like, look at this. Isn't it gorgeous? It's a lovely, lovely scenery. I love Tirana. Mostly because with it being an agrarian society and locked down for so long and everything, a lot of these areas were just untouched. They're unspoiled, things like that. This is celebrating joining NATO. See, Shkiperia. Shkiperia. Anyway, isn't this cool? That'd be a fun place to go hiking and explore. Here's a little political map of Albania, all the major cities in the area. Here's the theater at Butrint. Oh, wow. This is that coastal city I told you about, Saranda, I think that's how you pronounce it. But it's, look at the water, like it's gorgeous. And this is near the city of Shkoner. Apparently that's Lake Shkoner up there. Very, very serene. We've got some wetlands here. Doesn't say which ones these are. Oh, it does. It's the Karavasta Lagoon. Okay. And here is some pelicans flying over Lake Prespa. And this is a view from Corfu, apparently. So you can see the Albanian coast over there. And this is Tirana. That's Mount Deity, I believe. But yeah, big bustling city. You can see the new mosque built right there. There'll be a picture of it later in the religion section. Albania did suffer a really horrific earthquake in 2019, a 6.4. You know, there were deaths, but it mostly just destroyed a lot of infrastructure, a lot of injuries. Anyway, and this is in Durrës, which is on the coast up here. And very old castle. And that's Shkoner. This is a huge statue of Emperor Constantine. It's like I told you, he was born in Illyria, right? Illyricum. Here is Skanderbeg, a statue of him, being very brave and bold. And the Independence Monument, and you can see this is Ismail Kemali. Here's King Zog. Just, I don't know, why do so many fascist European dictators look the same? I don't know. There's Enver Hoxha. And this is Ramiz Alia, who was the leader of Albania when he allowed a lot more freedom. And here is Salih Berisha, president from 92 to 97, PM from 2005 to 2013. Here are some of the 1997 protests. And this is the current Prime Minister, Edi Rama. That's really cool. That's a great Albanian picture, right? We've got the old Gjirokastër fortress, the mountains, and the Albanian flag. Okay, Shqiperia. Anyway. Here is the flag. Let's read about it, because let's be real. This is an awesome flag. This is like a don't mess with me kind of flag. Like, we are awesome kind of flag. Let's read about it. The Albanian flag, adopted in 1992, is a black two-headed eagle on a red background. Its significance goes back to Skanderbeg. After abandoning the Turkish army, because he was forced to join the Turkish army, he returned to his father's home in Kruja. Above the castle, he flew a red flag with the double eagle, his family seal, as a symbol of his return. With the castle and the flag behind him, he proclaimed, "I have not brought you liberty, I found it among you." The Albanian nobles united behind him, and for the next 25 years they held off the invading Turks. In modern times, the flag has variously borne a helmet, a hammer and sickle, and finally a star. After the fall of communism, the flag was returned to its original design. This is the presidential palace, and this is the Albanian Assembly building. And it's a very angry lady at a rally for judicial reform, it says. Here is their money. They use the lek. I was reading this. The currency is named after Alexander the Great. It's often shortened to leka in Albanian. It's really interesting. I wonder if they join the EU, if they're going to adopt the euro. We'll find out, I suppose. Let's see. Some beautiful, oh my gosh, look at this. Okay, look at this, look at this. The beautiful farmland, the mountains, rainbow, clouds. It's so gorgeous. How lovely. And since Albania's had kind of a shady history economically, some shady economic practices have been going on, such as growing cannabis. So this is a police squad destroying a cannabis field. Apparently it's one of the more profitable export crops from Albania. A gorgeous golden eagle, isn't that fantastic? And this reservoir has seen better days. I would not drink out of that. This is one of the islands that Albania owns. This has its Zan Island and a gorgeous waterfall. There's a sweet face. And a couple showing off some traditional Albanian clothes. This guy has a lot of goats up in the hills. This is in Shkoner. It's very modern looking now, isn't it? And this is a refugee camp for Kosovo. So you can imagine, with all the unrest that's happened in the region, the former Yugoslavia around it, I'll show you the map again. There's been a lot of Albanian refugees during the war here that fled to Albania during the rough times in Albania. Some even fled to Kosovo and other neighboring countries. So refugees have been going kind of back and forth. Now that the violence is pretty much not violent anymore, a lot of refugees have gone back. But some have stayed. I mean, they are Albanian ethnically. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous day. Some of the beautiful buildings here. Okay, let's talk about the blood feuds. So apparently it was tradition that if someone wronged you, you were allowed to straight up murder someone in their family. That was acceptable. And then a person, that family could get revenge against you and kill someone in your family. Wild. So these towers were built to hide out in. If you were worried you're about to get murdered in a blood feud, you could hide there. Pretty wild. Apparently it kept getting outlawed, and then people would just keep doing it anyway because it was tradition. absolutely intense. There's a little cafe here. And they're working hard in school, learning their numbers. Here's a statue of Mother Teresa. Like I said, she's from this area. She's ethnically Albanian. She's much more famous for her work in India, but this is where she was from. Very old church, a Byzantine style. And this is the new mosque in Tirana that I told you about. It was completed in 2020. And there's some controversy because it was built by Turkey. And people apparently are like, why would Turkey put this investment into us? What do they want from us? But it is a very gorgeous building, isn't it? Looks like the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. And this is the Resurrection of Christ Orthodox Cathedral, built in 1995. Since remember, religion was outlawed for a long time in its modern history, so all these new places of worship being built, it's really cool. Reading the newspaper there. No one's quite sure where the Albanian language came from. His ancient origins? Question mark. There's a little corner bookshop. See, this guy is carving into stone. Very intricate. This is Ismail Kadari, famous author. And this is a really cool mosaic from the communist times. It's really interesting. You can see all the different eras of warriors in Albanian history standing behind the communists marching forward, right? But it's really neat. Look at all the Romans and the freedom fighters there, all sorts. It's really neat. If it weren't communist propaganda, right? It's really well done. Playing some instruments here. There's a flute, and this is a lahuta, tiny, tiny little string. Doing a traditional dance in their traditional costumes. And some of the older cities. This is Berat. Let's take a closer look. That's really cool. What a beautiful city. And this is Gjirokastër. You can see the little market there. That's awesome. Very old cities. You could get some traditional clothes there for sale. Climbing up this big mountain. Up for a hike. Swimming in the water. Oh, that looks so nice. It's really, I've said this a million times these past few weeks. It's really hot here. This sounds fantastic. Some football players here. I don't want to try to pronounce that name. I don't want to butcher it, but there's a football star there, and there's the football pitch. And playing some basketball too. And some beach volleyball. The best kind of volleyball. A little choir here. Very traditional looking. New Year's fireworks over Tirana. Mother Teresa. Very beloved figure. The Zawfest music festival. Buying some produce. Yum yum. Big old potatoes there. He's making tsevapi, I think. It kind of looks like a sandwich, doesn't it? Tsevapi, a grilled sausage-shaped meat made of ground beef and pork. Yeah, it's like a really fancy sausage, I guess. And the little cafes there. And Tuli Peri Mesh, I think. It says it's like ratatouille. Some other foods, baked lamb and yogurt, Albanian walnut cake. These look good. I would eat those. And then there's another map of Albania. You can really see all the mountains there. And that's how close Italy is. Just a hop, skip, and a jump over. And then there's the mountain that's on the map. That's the highest point right there. Oh, and then that's where Albania is located in Europe. Can you see it circled there? That's where we are in Europe. Alright, so that's going to be the end of the video tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I do hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good night.